The Arcane Formulas or Mental Alchemy by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 1. The Forerunner and the Master. Singular rumors reached the ears of the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the circumjacent territories. It was reported that a novel prophet had manifested in the valley of the lower Jordan, and in the wilderness of northern Judea, expounding startling doctrines. His precepts resembled those of the prophets of antiquity, and his exclamation of "Repent! Repent ye! For the kingdom of heaven is at hand," evoked profound memories of the ancient teachers of the race. This caused the commonality to gaze with wonderment upon one another, and induced the ruling classes to frown and appear grave whenever the appellation of the new prophet was cited. The man whom the masses designated a prophet, and whom the exalted characterized as an impostor, was known as John the Baptist, and he dwelt in the wilderness, far removed from the accustomed haunts of men. He was attired in the rude raiment of the roaming ascetics, his coarse robe of camel's hide being secured about his form by a rough girdle of leather. His sustenance was frugal and elemental, consisting of the indigenous locust of the region, accompanied by the wild honey accumulated by the apiaries of the wilderness. In aspect, John, whom men styled the Baptist, was tall, sinewy, and rugged. His epidermis was darkened to a deep brown by the winds and sun which assailed it unheeded. His long, raven hair depended loosely about his shoulders and was tossed like the mane of a lion when he discoursed. His beard was unkempt and untrimmed. His eyes gleamed like incandescent coals and appeared to sear into the very souls of his auditors. His was the countenance of the religious enthusiast possessing a message for the world. This untamed prophet was most strenuous, and his teachings were articulated in the most vigorous phraseology. There was neither tact, nor policy, nor persuasion in his proclamation. He projected his verbal fulminations directly into the multitude, the very force and earnestness emanating from him serving to imbue his words with a vitality and magnetism which dashed itself into the crowd like a spark of electricity, rendering men unstable upon their feet, and driving the truth into them as if by the charge of a potent explosive. He informed them that the spiritual grain was to be garnered into the storehouses, whilst the chaff was to be consumed as if by a fiery furnace, and that the axe was to be laid to the root of the trees which brought not forth good fruit. Verily, the day of Jehovah, long promised by the prophets, was imminent for his auditors and adherents. John soon attracted to himself a following, the populace flocking to him from all quarters of the country, even from Galilee. His disciples commenced to confer among themselves, inquiring whether indeed this man were not the long-promised Master, the Messiah for whom all Israel had waited for centuries. This speculation, coming to the ears of the prophet, caused him to resolve the query in his discourses, declaring, "There cometh one mightier than I after me, the latchet of whose shoes I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose. He that cometh after me is mightier than I." And thus it gradually became known to his following, and to the strangers attending his assemblies, that this John the Baptist, mighty orator though he be, was but the herald of one far greater than he who should follow, that he was the forerunner of the Master, in accordance with the Oriental imagery which depicted the precursor of great dignitaries running ahead of his Master's chariot, crying aloud to all people gathered upon the road that they must yield passage for the approaching personage, shouting constantly, "Make ye a way! Make ye a way for the Lord!" Accordingly, there arose a new wave of excitement among John's following, which disseminated rapidly to the surrounding country at this promise of the advent of the Lord, the Master, perhaps even the Messiah of the Jews. Consequently, many more repaired unto John, and with him awaited the coming of the Master. This John the Baptist was born in the mountainous region of Judea, nearly 30 years prior to his appearance as a prophet. His father was of the priestly order or sacerdotal caste, having attained an advanced age, and lived with his aged wife in retirement, far removed from the tumult and confusion of the world, awaiting the gradual approach of that which cometh to all men alike. Then there came to them a child of their senectitude, unexpected and unhoped for, arriving as a mark of a special favor from God. A son, to whom they bestowed the name of Johanan, which in the Hebrew tongue signifies Jehovah is gracious. Reared in the domicile of his parents, the house of a priest, John saturated himself with all the inner teachings reserved for the few and withheld from the masses. The secrets of the Kabbalah, that system of Hebrew occultism and mysticism in which the high priests of Judea were well versed, were disclosed to him, and occult tradition maintains that he was initiated into the inner circle of the Hebrew mystics, composed solely of priests of a specific grade and their sons. John became an occultist and a mystic. When the youth reached the age of puberty, he departed from the home of his parents and ventured into the wilderness, orienting himself toward the east, from whence cometh all light. In other words, he became an ascetic, dwelling in the wilderness, precisely as in India, even to this day, youths of the Brahmin or priestly class sometimes forsake their homes, renouncing their luxurious existence, and flee to the jungle, where they wander for years as ascetics, clad in a single garment, subsisting on the most elementary nourishment, and developing their spiritual consciousness. John remained a recluse until he attained the age of approximately 30 years, at which time he emerged from the wilderness to preach the coming of the Lord, in obedience to the impulses of the Spirit. Let us ascertain where he was, and what he performed, during the 15 years of his life in the wilderness and the concealed places of Judea. The traditions of the Essenes, preserved among occultists, state that whilst John was an ascetic, he imbibed the teachings of that singular occult brotherhood known as the Essenes, and after having served his apprenticeship, was accepted into the order as an initiate, and attained their higher degrees reserved only for those of developed spirituality and power. It is asserted that even when he was a mere lad, he claimed and demonstrated his right to be fully initiated into the mysteries of the order, and was believed to have been a reincarnation of one of the ancient Hebrew prophets. The Essenes. The Essenes were an ancient Hebrew occult brotherhood which had been in existence for many centuries prior to John's era. They maintained their principal seat on the eastern shores of the Dead Sea, although their influence extended over all of Palestine, and their ascetic brethren were to be discovered in every wilderness. The requirements of the order were exceedingly strict, and its rites and ceremonies were of the highest mystical and occult degree. The neophyte was required to serve a preliminary apprenticeship of 1 year before being admitted to even partial recognition as a member and brother. A further apprenticeship of 2 additional years was requisite before he was admitted to full membership and extended the right hand of fellowship. Additional time was mandated for further advancement, and even time alone did not entitle the member to certain high degrees, the requirement being that actual knowledge, power, and attainment must first be manifested. As in all true occult orders, the candidate must effectuate his own salvation, neither money nor influence possessing any weight. Absolute obedience to the rules of the order, absolute poverty regarding material possessions, and absolute sexual continence. These were the conditions of membership to be observed by both neophyte and initiate, as well as by the high-degree master. Comprehending this, one may imagine the revulsion inspired in John by the amorous solicitations of Salome, which caused him to forfeit his life rather than violate the vows of his order, as is so startlingly depicted in the theatrical productions of modern times. Among the ceremonial observances of the Essenes was the rite of baptism, which was conferred upon candidates with befitting solemnity and liturgy. The mystical import of this ceremony, comprehended by all members of occult orders, even extant to this day, constituted an integral portion of the ritualism originated by the Essenes, and the rite itself stood as a distinguishing characteristic of their fraternity. The administration of this rite by John the Baptist during his ministry, and its subsequent adoption by the Christian Church as a cardinal sacrament, of which the modern aspersion of infants serves as both a memento and a surrogate, establishes an unequivocal nexus between the Essenes and modern Christianity. Furthermore, it indelibly impresses the seal of mysticism and occultism upon the latter, however reluctant the general populace may be to acknowledge this reality amidst their uninformed misconceptions and materialistic proclivities. The Essenes espoused and promulgated the doctrine of reincarnation, the immanence of God, and sundry other occult verities, the vestiges of which appear recurrently within Christian theology, as will become evident as we advance in these instructions. Through the agency of its exalted brother, John the Baptist, the order transmitted its teachings to the nascent Christian Church, thereby permanently grafting itself upon a new religious development then emerging upon the world stage. Indeed, the transplanted boughs remain extant. Naturally, the authentic history of the profound connection between the Essenes and Christianity resides exclusively within the traditions of the Essenes and other ancient mystic orders. Much of this lore has never been committed to print, having been transmitted from receptor to preceptor across the centuries, even unto this day, within occult fraternities. However, to demonstrate to the student that we do not proffer assertions devoid of accessible substantiation, we direct attention to any standard authoritative reference on the subject. For instance, should one consult the article regarding the Essenes within the New International Encyclopedia, one shall encounter the following observations. It is a compelling inquiry as to the extent of the debt Christianity owes to Essenism. It would appear that ample opportunity existed for definitive contact between John the Baptist and this brotherhood. His period of preparation was passed in the wilderness near the Dead Sea. His preaching of righteousness toward God and justice toward one's fellow men was consonant with Essenism, while his insistence upon baptism accorded with the Essenic emphasis on lust rations. The same article posits that the Essenic Brotherhood promulgated a specific perspective regarding the origin, present condition, and future destiny of the soul. Inter alia, that it was held to be pre-existent, incarcerated within the corporeal form as though in a prison. John issued forth from the wilderness upon attaining the approximate age of 30 years, commencing his ministerial labors which endured for several years until his execution at the hands of Herod. He amassed a vast and fervent following, initially drawn from the humbler classes and subsequently encompassing a number of individuals of higher social standing. He organized his more advanced adherents into a discipleship, adhering to prescribed regulations regarding fasting, worship, ceremonial rites, and the like, closely modeled upon those observed by the Essenes. This organization persisted until the demise of John, at which point it amalgamated with the followers of Jesus, exerting a pronounced influence upon the early Christian Church. As previously elucidated, one of the cardinal requisites enjoined upon all his followers was that of baptism, the Essenic rite from which he derived his familiar appellation, the Baptist. However, it must be borne in mind that for John, this rite constituted a most sacred, mystical, and symbolic ceremony, possessing a profound occult significance unperceived by many of his converts who submitted to it under the sway of religious emotion, and who naively regarded it as a magical operation capable of purging sin from their souls much as soil is lavated from the body, a belief which appears to remain prevalent among the multitude. John labored assiduously at his mission, and the Baptists, or followers of Johanan as they were designated, proliferated rapidly. His assemblies were occasions of great moment for the thousands who congregated from all quarters of Palestine to behold and audit the prophet of the wilderness, the Essene who had emerged from his seclusion. His gatherings were frequently characterized by startling phenomena, sudden conversions, visions, trances, and similar manifestations. Indeed, many attendees developed unusual powers and faculties. Yet, there came a day when a meeting was held that was destined to achieve universal renown. This was the occasion when the Master, of whose advent John had frequently prophesied, came unto John the Baptist. Jesus the Christ appeared upon the scene and confronted his forerunner. Tradition maintains that Jesus arrived unannounced and unrecognized by John and the populace. The forerunner remained unaware of the true nature and spiritual degree of his guest and applicant for baptism. Although the two were cousins, they had not encountered one another since childhood, and John did not initially identify Jesus. The traditions of the mystic orders further assert that Jesus then communicated to John the various signs of the occult fraternities to which they both belonged, proceeding from the common signals upward until Jesus advanced to degrees to which John had not attained, notwithstanding John's status as a distinguished high-degree Essene. Whereupon John perceived that the figure before him was no common petitioner for baptism, but was, contrarily, a mystic adept of the highest degree and an occult master, his superior in rank and spiritual unfoldment. John, recognizing this, remonstrated with Jesus, arguing that it was neither fitting nor in accordance with the protocols of the brotherhoods for the inferior to baptize the superior. Of this event, the New Testament records the following. But John forbade him, saying, I have need to be baptized of thee, and comest thou to me? Matthew 3 verse 14. Yet Jesus insisted that John administer the rite, citing the rationale that he wished to undergo the ceremonial to affix his seal of approbation upon it, and to demonstrate that he regarded himself as a man among men, come forth to experience the human condition. In both the occult traditions and the New Testament narrative, it is recorded that a mystical phenomenon transpired at the baptism. The Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him, accompanied by a voice from heaven declaring, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And with these words, the mission of John the Baptist as forerunner was consummated. The Master had appeared to commence his labors. The Master. And now, let us revert the pages of the Book of Time to a period approximately 30 years prior to the transpiration of the aforementioned events. Let us direct our scrutiny toward the circumstances surrounding the nativity of Jesus, that we may trace the mystic and occult forces operative from the inception of Christianity. Occurrences of paramount importance are encompassed within this 30-year interim. Let us commence the mystic narrative of Jesus the Christ, as it is relayed to the neophyte of every occult order by the master instructor, with the recitation of an event preceding his birth by more than a year. In Matthew 2 verses 1-2, the following is recounted. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. Within these simple words is encapsulated an event that, when elucidated in a far more comprehensive narrative, constitutes a vital component of the esoteric teachings of the mystic brotherhoods and occult orders of the Orient, and which is distinctly known to the members of affiliated secret orders in the Western world. The history of the Magi is entrenched in the traditions of the Oriental mystics, and we shall herein provide a concise delineation of the narrative as it is transmitted from Hierophant to Neophyte, from Guru to Chela. To fully comprehend the narrative, it is imperative to ascertain the identity of these wise men of the East, known as the Magi. This knowledge shall now be imparted. The Magi, or wise men. Regarding the Magi, or wise men. While the translators of the New Testament rendered the designation of these distant visitors as the wise men from the East, the Apostle Matthew, in the original Greek text, employed the specific term the Magi. This fact may be verified by reference to the original Greek manuscripts or the Revised Translation, which annotates the Greek terminology in a footnote. Any authoritative encyclopedia will corroborate this assertion. The appellation Magi constitutes the precise nomenclature utilized by Matthew in the original Greek composition of the Gospel, whereas the phrase wise men originated with the English translators. There exists absolutely no disputation regarding this matter among biblical scholars. Notwithstanding, the general populace remains unaware of the connection, nor do they identify the wise men with the Oriental Magians. The term Magi entered the English language directly from the Greek, which in turn acquired it through gradual linguistic evolution from the Persian, Chaldean, Median, and Assyrian tongues. It signifies, literally, wonder worker, and was applied to the members of the occult priestly orders of Persia, Media, and Chaldea, who were mystic adepts and occult masters. Ancient history abounds with references to this fraternity. They served as the custodians of the world's occult knowledge for centuries, and the inestimable treasures of the inner teachings possessed by the race today have descended through the hands of these men, the Magi, who tended the sacred fires of mysticism and maintained the burning of the flame. In contemplating their undertaking, one is reminded of the verses of the poet Edward Carpenter, who intones, "Oh, let not the flame die out, cherished age after age in its dark caverns, in its holy temples cherished, fed by pure ministers of love, let not the flame die out." The title of Magi was highly esteemed in that ancient era. However, it subsequently fell into disrepute during later times, owing to its increasing application as a designation for practitioners of black magic, or the malevolent wonder-workers and sorcerers of that period. Yet, as a contributor to the New International Encyclopedia has accurately posited, the term is employed in its true sense by Matthew of the wise men who came from the east to Jerusalem to worship Christ. The significance of this event must be observed, for the Messianic doctrine was an ancient and established tenet within Zoroastrianism. The aforementioned article states of the Magi, they believed in a resurrection, a future life, and the advent of a Savior. To comprehend the nature of the Magi in connection with their occult wonderworking, one must consult the lexicons, wherein one will ascertain that the word magic is derived from the title Magi, the term magician having originally been Magian, signifying one of the Magi. Webster defines the word magic as follows: the hidden wisdom supposed to be possessed by the Magi, relating to the occult powers of nature, mastery of secret forces in nature, etc. Thus, one may readily perceive the veracity of our statement that these wise men, the Magi who journeyed to worship the Christ child, were in reality the representatives of the great mystic brotherhoods and occult orders of the Orient, adepts, masters, hierophants. And thus do we discover the occult and mystic wonder-workers, the high-degree brethren of the great Eastern lodges of mystic occultism, appearing at the very inception of the story of Christianity, indicating their profound interest in the mortal nativity of the greater master whose advent they had long awaited, the Master of Masters. Furthermore, all occultists and mystics derive pleasure and justifiable pride from the fact that the initial recognition of the divine nature of this human child originated with these magi from the East, from the very heart of the mystic inner circles. To those so-called Christians to whom all that is connected with mysticism and occultism savors of fiery sulfur and brimstone, we would direct attention to this intimate, early relationship between the masters and the master, the star in the east. However, the mystic narrative commences even prior to the visitation of the Magi to Bethlehem. Did not the Magi inquire, "Where is he? We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him"? What is signified by the phrase, "We have seen his star in the east"? To the majority of Christians, the Star of Bethlehem denotes a massive celestial body that suddenly appeared in the heavens, akin to a great beacon light, and which miraculously guided the steps of the Magi, mile by mile, upon their arduous journey, until at last it rested in the firmament, stationary above the domicile wherein the child Jesus resided, between the ages of 1 and 2 years. In other words, they maintain the belief that this star had constantly guided these skilled mystics, occultists, and astrologers during their journey from the Far East, an expedition occupying over a year, until it ultimately directed them to Bethlehem and subsequently halted, stationary, over the house of Joseph and Mary. Alas! It is lamentable that these vulgar traditions of the ignorant multitude should have served for so long to obscure a beautiful mystic occurrence, and, by their utter improbability and unscientific nature, should have caused thousands to deride the authentically true legend of the Star of Bethlehem. It remains the province of the mystic traditions to dissipate the clouds of ignorance surrounding this beautiful narrative, and to re-establish it within the minds of men as a natural and scientific occurrence. This account of the traveling star arose from the superstitious and ignorant conceptions held by many Christians during the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries following the death of Christ. These fables were injected into the manuscripts bequeathed by the disciples, and subsequently began to be regarded as an integral portion of the authentic Gospels and Epistles, although the skilled biblical critics and scholars of the present day are rapidly discarding many of these additions as willful forgeries and interpolations. It must be remembered that the oldest manuscripts of the New Testament books are known by biblical scholars to have been inscribed not less than 300 years subsequent to the time of the original composition. They are merely copies of the originals, undoubtedly augmented, altered, and adulterated by the scribes through whose hands they have passed. This is not merely the assertion of an external critic. It is a fact clearly articulated in the writings of scholars within the churches engaged in the labor of biblical study and higher criticism, to whose works we refer any who may possess reason to question our statement. That portion of the verse wherein it is stated, "And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was," is known to the mystic and occult orders to constitute a rank interpolation into the narrative of the Magi. It is contrary to their own traditions and records, and is likewise contrary to reason and scientific laws. Indeed, this distorted account alone has been the cause of the development of thousands of infidels who could not accept the fable. All intelligent men are aware that a star is not merely a diminutive point of flame in the dome that separates us from a heaven on the other side of the blue shell, although such was the view of the ancients, as it is of many ignorant men and women today. Educated individuals understand that a star is either a planet of our solar system, similar to the sister planet we call the Earth, or else a mighty sun, likely many times larger than our own, situated countless millions of miles distant from our solar system. Furthermore, they know that planets possess invariable orbits and trajectories over which they travel unceasingly, so true to their course that their movements may be predicted centuries in advance, or calculated for centuries past. They are also aware that even the great fixed stars, those distant suns and centers of great solar systems akin to our own, occupy their own positions in the universe, possessing also their universal relations and movements. All who have studied even the most elementary textbook on astronomy are cognizant of these facts. Nevertheless, individuals are implored to accept without reservation the narrative of a mobile star, advancing slightly before the shepherds for a duration exceeding a year, and finally assuming a stationary position directly above the residence of Jesus, thereby indicating that the quest had concluded. Let us contrast this unscientific fable with the traditions and legends of the mystics, and subsequently determine a preference. Had such a star truly appeared, the historians of that era would certainly have documented it, for the East possessed learned and sagacious men in those days. Furthermore, as astrology was a rigorously scrutinized science, the phenomenon would have been noted and transmitted to posterity through both scripture and oral tradition. However, no such documentation or tradition exists among the Eastern populace, nor within the archives of the astrologers. Yet, a distinct record and tradition has been preserved, as we shall presently observe. Indeed, there truly existed a star of Bethlehem that guided the Magi to the dwelling of the infant Jesus. We possess the following substantiation of this fact: the traditions and doctrines of the mystic orders, transmitted from preceptor to disciple across centuries, the declarations and archives of the ancient astrologers, which may be verified by contemporary astronomical computations, and the calculations performed by modern astronomers, which shall be detailed a few paragraphs hence. These three sources of intelligence yield an identical narrative, as we shall demonstrate. Prior to advancing to an examination of this tripartite evidence, let us pause momentarily to consider the relationship between the Magi and astrology. To comprehend the narrative of the Magi's visitation to Jesus, one must recall that they were the veritable masters of astrological lore. Persia and the adjacent Oriental nations constituted the fountainhead of astrological instruction. Furthermore, these Magi were masters, adepts, and hierophants. Consequently, they possessed all knowledge available to the preeminent schools of astrology of that era. Much of their ancient astrological lore has been lost to the current race, yet to these ancient scholars, it was as much a science as chemistry and astronomy are to the intellectuals of our present age. The Magi had long awaited the manifestation and incarnation of a great master of masters, whose advent had been predicted centuries prior by certain great occult fathers of the mystic orders, with each generation hoping the event would occur during their lifetime. They had been instructed that upon the occurrence of the event, they would be notified via the planets, in accordance with the higher astrology. All students of even our contemporary fragmentary astrology will comprehend this concept. Thus, they waited and meticulously scanned the heavens for the omen. The traditions of the occult orders inform us that, ultimately, the Magi witnessed a peculiar planetary conjunction. Initially, the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in the constellation of Pisces, Subsequently, these two planets were joined by the planet Mars, with the three bodies in close positional proximity, creating a startling and unusual stellar display possessing profound astrological significance. It is established, as all astrologers ancient and modern are aware, that the constellation of Pisces is the constellation governing the national existence of Judea. Observing the predicted planetary conjunction occurring within the constellation associated with Judea, the Magi ascertained two facts: that the birth of the Master of Masters had transpired, and that he had been born in Judea, as indicated by the constellation wherein the conjunction took place. Consequently, having calculated the precise moment of the conjunction, they commenced their extensive journey toward Judea in search of the Master of Masters. Furthermore, the records of the astrologers, preserved within the Oriental occult brotherhoods and their monasteries, demonstrate that a few years prior to the Christian era, such a peculiar conjunction and combination of planets occurred in the constellation symbolizing the destinies of Judea. This was interpreted as indicating the appearance of an incarnation or avatar of a great divine soul, a master of masters, and a mystic of mystics. It must be recalled that these orders are composed of non-Christians, individuals whom the average Christian might designate as heathens, and therefore this testimony must be regarded as devoid of bias toward Christianity or the corroboration of its legends. Thirdly, the calculations of modern astronomy demonstrate, beyond the possibility of contradiction, that in the Roman year 747, the planets Saturn and Jupiter formed a conjunction in the constellation of Pisces, and that these two planets, remaining in close proximity, were joined by the planet Mars in the spring of 748. The eminent astronomer Kepler first performed this calculation in the year 1604, and it has subsequently been verified by modern computations. To those who might object that these events transpired 7 years prior to the commonly accepted date of Christ's birth, we posit that any modern treatise on New Testament chronology, or any encyclopedia or reference work on the subject, will demonstrate that the former calculations were erroneous by several years. Furthermore, the records of other events mentioned in the Bible, such as the census that brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem, enable modern biblical scholars to fix the date of Christ's birth at approximately 6 or 7 years prior to the conventionally accepted time. Thus, modern research fully corroborates the astrological record and the mystic traditions. Consequently, it would appear that the arrival of the wise men, the Magi, was in accordance with astrological signs, of which interpretation they were adepts and masters. When this truth is comprehended, how puerile and petty appears the myth of the traveling star found in the commonly accepted exoteric version. The illustrations of the wise men led by a mobile heavenly body, traversing the skies and ultimately halting over the cottage of Joseph, imagery with which Sunday school texts abound, must be relegated to the same refuse receptacle containing the Bible illustrations, formerly so popular, that depict Jehovah as a bald, elderly patriarch with a long white beard, clad in flowing robes designed to conceal his form. Is it any wonder that skeptics, infidels, and scoffers of spiritual truths have arisen in substantial numbers, when they have been commanded to accept these assertions or face damnation? Furthermore, is not this connection between astrology and early Christianity a rebuke to the modern Christian Church, which derides and scoffs at the science of astrology as a base superstition suitable only for fools and ignoramuses? Does not this depiction of the Magi provide a lucid view of what was formerly regarded as a mere fable, to be solemnly smiled upon and taught to children, with whom the narrative has always been a favorite owing to their intuitive perception of an underlying truth? Now, armed with this mystic version, can you not enjoy the legend alongside the children? In this connection, let us once more quote from the New International Encyclopedia, a standard reference work, as you are aware, which states, "Some of the earlier Christian fathers argued against the doctrines of the earlier astrology, while others received them in a modified form, and indeed it formed a part of the basis of their religion in the gospel narrative of the visit to Bethlehem of the wise men of the East, who were Chaldean magi or astrologers. Herein lies the testimony found in all standard reference books, yet how many among you have been cognizant of it? To comprehend the significance of the event that drew the steps of the Magi to Bethlehem, one must realize that the coming of the Master was a favored subject of speculation and discourse among occultists and mystic organizations throughout the Oriental nations. It had been foretold in all tongues that a great Master would be bestowed upon the world, a mighty avatar or manifestation of deity in human form, who would incarnate to redeem the world from the materiality that threatened it. The sacred writings of India, Persia, Chaldea, Egypt, Media, Assyria, and diverse other realms had presaged this occurrence for many centuries, and all mystics and occultists yearned for the day upon which the Master would manifest. The Jewish people also possessed numerous traditions concerning the advent of a Messiah, born of the seed of David at Bethlehem. However, their Messiah was regarded primarily as a probable earthly monarch, destined to liberate Israel from the Roman yoke. Consequently, the Jewish tradition was deemed of inferior moment to their own prognostications by the mystic and occult brotherhoods of the East. To them, it was to be an avatar of deity, God in human form arriving to assume his rightful seat as the Grand Master of the Universal Grand Lodge of Mystic, a descent of pure spirit into matter. This conception was undeniably far more elevated than that held by the Jews. Therefore, comprehending these matters, one may readily understand why the Magi pursued their quest with such ardor and enthusiasm. They traversed many arduous miles to reach Bethlehem, a journey that consumed over a year. They arrived in Bethlehem more than a year subsequent to the birth of Christ and the appearance of the star, the vision of which had initiated them upon their quest. They sought not a newborn infant as common belief posits. Rather, they searched for a child born more than a year prior. Finally, following their protracted and weary wandering over hill and plain, mountain and desert, the Magi found themselves within Jerusalem, inquiring diligently regarding the whereabouts of the Master of Masters, the Promised One, whose advent had been the subject of prophecy for centuries among Eastern peoples. The Jewish citizens of whom they inquired, although unacquainted with the predictions concerning a mystic master or avatar of deity, were nonetheless thoroughly conversant with the prophecies regarding the coming of the Hebrew Messiah. Naturally, they surmised that it was this anticipated earthly king of the Jews regarding whom the Magi inquired, and thus they reported far and wide that these distinguished men from the East had arrived in Jerusalem to locate the Messiah, the King of the Jews, who was destined to deliver Israel from the Roman yoke. Furthermore, as the Gospel of Matthew informs us, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. This was naturally so, when one recalls that it was an earthly kingdom they expected the Messiah to inherit. Consequently, gathering the chief priests and scribes of Jerusalem around him, he bade them articulate the particulars concerning the prophecies of the Messiah, specifically where he was expected to be born. They answered him, saying, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so have the prophets spoken." Upon hearing the testimony of the scribes and priests, the wily Herod, who feared the realization of this ancient Hebrew prophecy which threatened to cost him his throne if fulfilled, summoned the Magi to his palace and, in private consultation, inquired of them the reason for their search. When they informed him of the astrological indications and of the star, he became even more agitated and wished to locate the dangerous child. Thus, he inquired of them the precise date at which the star had appeared, that he might be better able to find the infant, ascertaining its date of birth in Bethlehem. Learning this, he bade them proceed to Bethlehem to find the child they sought, and cunningly added, "And when ye have found him, bring me word, that I also may come and worship him." Thus craftily concealing his intentions to seize and assassinate the child, he endeavored to press the Magi into his service as investigators by pretending to join in their desire to locate the divine child. The Magi traveled onward to Bethlehem and, upon arriving there, made diligent inquiry regarding infants who had been born about the time the star appeared. There were numerous infants born in Bethlehem during that same month, naturally, and the search was difficult. However, they soon heard strange rumors concerning a babe born to travelers in Bethlehem about that time, the birth of whom had been attended by a strange occurrence. This peculiar happening is related in Luke 2 verses 8 to 20, wherein it is stated that at the time of the birth of Jesus in the manger, certain shepherds keeping the night watch over their flocks beheld an angel standing by them, and the glory of the Lord shining round about them. The angel bade them be not afraid, for to them were to be given tidings of great joy, for there was born that very day, in Bethlehem, one who was to be the anointed Lord of the world. The angel further directed them that the babe would be found lying in a manger within a stable, wrapped in swaddling clothes, which was to serve as their sign. Suddenly, the place was filled with a multitude of supernatural beings praising God, singing, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill among men." The shepherds flocked to the town and there discovered the child in the manger. Subsequently, they spread abroad the report of the wondrous event accompanying the birth of the child. Consequently, the child and his parents became objects of considerable public interest. Thus, when the Magi instituted their search, they were in due time informed of this strange occurrence. They visited the house of Joseph and Mary and beheld the babe. Making close inquiry of the parents, they ascertained that the time of the child's birth tallied precisely with the moment of the astrological signs. Then, they cast the child's horoscope and knew that the shepherd's vision coincided with their own science, and that here, indeed, was he for whom the Eastern occultists and mystics had waited for centuries. They had found the Master. The star child was before them. Then these great men of their own lands, these adepts, masters, and hierophants, prostrated themselves upon the ground before the child and accorded him the salutation due only to the great occult master of masters who had come to take his seat upon the throne of the Grand Master of the Great Lodge. Yet the child knew naught of this and merely smiled sweetly at these strange men in gorgeous foreign robes, reaching out his small hand toward them. However, occult tradition holds that the small fingers and thumb of his right hand, outstretched toward the Magi, unconsciously assumed the mystic symbol of the occult benediction used by the masters and hierophants, thus bestowing upon the worshippers that master's benediction. The young Master of Masters thus imparted his first blessing to his followers and exalted worshippers. Yet his throne was not that of the Great Lodge, but a still higher place, the knees of a mother. The Magi then made mystic and symbolic offerings to the child. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh they offered him. Gold, signifying the tribute offered to a ruler, was the first symbol. Then came frankincense, the purest and rarest incense used by the occult and mystic brotherhoods and orders in their ceremonies and rites, when they were contemplating the sacred symbol of the absolute master of the universe, this frankincense was their symbol of worship. Then, the last symbol of all was the myrrh, which in occult and mystic symbolism indicated the bitterness of mortal life. Bitter though pungent, preserving though stinging. This was the meaning of the myrrh. That this child, though divine in his inner nature, was still mortal in body and brain, and must accept and experience the bitter tang of life. Myrrh, the strength of which preserves and prevents decay, and yet which smarts, tangs, and stings incessantly. A worthy symbol of mortal life, assuredly. Wise men, indeed, ye magi, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. A prophecy, symbol, and revelation of the life of the Son of Man with his indwelling pure spirit. The Magi, having performed their rites and ceremonies, subsequently departed from Bethlehem. Yet they did not forget the child. They preserved a careful watch over his movements until they saw him again. Saw him again, you inquire? Indeed, they saw him again. Although the Gospels remain reticent regarding these matters, maintaining silence over a span of many years in the life of Jesus, the archives and traditions of the Eastern mystics are replete with esoteric knowledge concerning these unrecorded intervals, as shall be elucidated subsequently. Though remaining after the departure of the Magi, yet continuing under their benevolent surveillance, the child flourished in strength, developing in both intellect and physical stature. However, the Magi, having been admonished by superior intelligences within a vision, declined to return to the duplicitous Herod. Instead, they withdrew to their own country via an alternate route, Matthew 2 verse 12. Herod awaited their return in vain. Subsequently, upon perceiving their evasion, he wrathfully decreed the massacre of all male progeny born in Bethlehem and its environs who were 2 years of age or younger. He calculated this duration based upon the Magi's observation of the star, as the narrative regarding the determination of the timeline describes. Thus, he slew all male children within Bethlehem and the borders thereof, from 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time which he had precisely ascertained from the wise men. Herod sought to assassinate the dreaded Messiah, the King of the Jews, who threatened to usurp his earthly throne, by exterminating every male infant in Bethlehem born subsequent to the astrological indication articulated by the Magi. Yet, this machination proved futile, for Joseph had been cautioned by an angel in a dream, receiving instructions to take the mother and child, flee into Egypt, and remain there until Herod's demise. Consequently, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus fled from Herod's wrath, departing clandestinely for Egypt. Occult traditions maintain that the expenses of this journey undertaken by the impoverished carpenter and his family, a precipitate voyage into foreign lands without opportunity to acquire funds en route, were defrayed by means of the gold the Magi had presented to Jesus, and which they had insisted his parents sequester for his future utilization. Thus, the gold provided by these occult mystics preserved the founder of Christianity from massacre. How inadequately has Christianity repaid this debt, particularly when one contemplates the persecution of the Oriental heathen by the so-called Christians throughout history. Observe, furthermore, that they conveyed the child to Egypt, the domicile of mystery and occultism, the land of Isis, a worthy sanctuary for the great occult master destined to emerge. Occult tradition further asserts that one evening, wearied by their protracted journey, the family paused to pass the night within the precinct of the Sphinx and the pyramids. It is said that the mother and babe rested between the outstretched forelimbs of the mighty Sphinx, which held them ensconced in safety, while Joseph positioned himself upon the base before them, sleeping while maintaining his vigil. What a tableau! The master as an infant protected by the Sphinx, that ancient occult emblem, while nearby, rising like formidable, watchful sentinels, stood the great pyramids of Egypt, the masterwork of Egypt's mystics, every contour and dimension of which symbolizes an occult teaching. Verily, Christianity is indeed cradled within the lap of mysticism. Thus in death our first lesson. The second lesson shall address the mystic teachings regarding the divine incarnation of the Spirit within the mortal body of Jesus, a subject of paramount importance to all who are vexed by this complex theological point. We aspire to shed the mystic light of truth upon this obscurity which so many have found benighted, unintelligible, and contrary to reason, natural law, and science. The mystic teachings stand as the great reconciler of faith and reason. Chapter 2. The Spiritual Virgin Birth. One of the primary areas of contention arising between established theology on the one hand and the schools of thought designated as rationalism, higher criticism, and comparative mythology on the other, concerns the phenomenon known as the virgin birth of Jesus. We may perhaps elucidate these points of divergence more distinctly by merely articulating the opposing perspectives and, subsequently, presenting the traditions of the occult brotherhoods and societies regarding this subject. We are positioned to articulate these conflicting views without prejudice, for we rely upon the occult teachings with a sense of existing above and exterior to the theological strife currently raging between these two schools of Christian theologians. We trust that the reader will withhold judgment until the examination of this matter within the present lesson has been concluded. We believe it shall be discovered that the occult teachings provide the key to the mystery and furnish the reconciliation between the opposing theological perspectives which threaten to sunder the churches into two camps: the adherents of the established orthodox theology and the proponents of the rationalist and higher critic viewpoints. The school of theology which adheres to the ancient orthodox doctrines regarding the virgin birth, teachings commonly accepted without interrogation by the mass of churchgoers, maintains the following position. Mary, a young Jewish maiden or virgin, was betrothed to Joseph, a carpenter of Nazareth in Galilee. Prior to her marriage, she was informed through an angelic vision that she would miraculously conceive a son to whom she would give birth, and who would reign upon the throne of David and be designated the Son of the Highest. This doctrine relies exclusively upon certain declarations contained within the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Matthew's account proceeds as follows. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. When as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost. Then Joseph her husband, being a just man, and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily. But while he thought on these things, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary thy wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Ghost. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. Now all this was done, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is, God with us. Then Joseph, being raised from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord had bidden him, and took unto him his wife, and knew her not until she had brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Jesus. Matthew 1 verses 18 to 25. Luke's account is as follows. And in the 6th month the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee, named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And the angel came in unto her, and said, Hail, thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and cast in her mind what manner. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.